spiritual journey for the day. And last year I did 12 different series, one for each month. One series was only 28 days. Guess which month that was for? They're sharp today, and several were 30, and several others were 31 days. This one was a 30-day study, and so I wrote devotionals on, you think, well, how many different things could you write about the life of the Apostle Paul? A lot. A lot. U-H-L-O-T. A lot. As I usually, when I do this, for any study that I do, the first thing I do is I sit down and I figure out, well, how's this going to go? How am I going to fit this into? And I need to look for themes, and as I found out, as you just told me, I wish you'd told me that before, there's a lot to fit in there. And many things are, you try to fit in between in the lines in there as you go through, but a lot is left out. So where would you start in the life of the Apostle Paul? Acts 9. That's a good place to start. Where would you start telling your story? The road to Damascus? You've been on the road to Damascus? But if you had to tell your personal story, where would you start? As far back as you could remember, or someone else remembered. And that first place to start is, I was born at a very young age. You would start, if someone writes their autobiography, they're typically going to tell you what about themselves as they were growing up? Where they were born. Good stuff, okay? And they're going to tell where they were born, a little bit about their life, and sort of a potpourri of things. We're actually going to start in Acts chapter 21. Acts chapter 21, if you'd like to turn there. Because Paul gets to tell his story over and over, not only in the book of Acts, but in the letters that he writes. And if you pick them out, you can get a pretty clear chronological line of the life of Paul if you know how to put them together. In Acts chapter 21, beginning in verse 37, as Paul was about to be brought into the barracks, he said to the tribune, now, a little bit of back story on this, Paul is being arrested in Jerusalem. And as he does, the riot is beginning, and in order to save Paul's life, the leader, the tribune, brings Paul away from the crowd lest he be torn apart. As Paul was about to be brought into the barracks, he said to the tribune, "May I say something to you?" And he said, "Do you know Greek? Are you not the Egyptian then who recently stirred up a revolt and led the 4,000 men of the assassins out of the wilderness?" Paul replied, "I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no obscure city. I beg you, permit me to speak to the people." And when he had given him permission, Paul, standing on the steps, motioned with his hand to the people. And when there was a great hush, he addressed them in the Hebrew language. Now, there is so much in this passage that gives us a glimpse into who Paul was. And Paul is from where? Paul is or Saul, as he's being known. And we'll get into the reason why his name was changed from Saul to Paul. Saul is a Jewish name, a Hebrew name. Paul is a Greek name. There. Don't you wish I could be that concise in many things? But he says, "I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no obscure city." And what does he mean? And where is Tarsus in Cilicia? Now you have maps. How many of you have your Bibles there with maps in the back? If your map is in the back, you might have to search, but you would look typically into the 1st century Palestine. And just up around the corner, if we were, let's say that we were in Gaylord right now, tornado notwithstanding. And we were going to travel as if we were going to Cilicia. We'd go up across the bridge and make a left. Well, that's how it was from Jerusalem. You would go up. You couldn't go to the left because that's where the water's at, because you're going to walk. You're going to walk up, and then you're going to make a left when you get into what is modern-day Turkey. And that area is known as Cilicia. And he was from Tarsus in Cilicia. In fact, that's what Christ spoke when he is telling Ananias in Damascus. He says, I want you to go, and I want you to meet this man, Saul from Tarsus. There's a man from Tarsus named Saul. So that's how Paul relates it. And he tells this story, and we begin to fill in the blanks into this. And if you're going to, how many people here were born in Traverse City? 1. 2. 2 people. How many were born near Traverse City? Way out in Beulah area? How many were born in Michigan? A few more hands go up. How many people were born outside of Michigan? You're not. Okay, outside of. How many of you were born outside the country, in another country? Now that might seem like an odd question, but if you were to talk to people who were military brats, they say, well, I was born, I'm in a club with a lady who was born in Turkey. Perfect English, you couldn't tell. Her father was in the military, so she was born in Turkey. And other people are born in different countries. And you, say that again? Still an American citizen because of the military? Mm-hmm. Can she run for president? Probably. There we go. Okay, good. So if the further away that you live, the more interesting your story seems to be, wouldn't you say? You think, well, you were born in Traverse City, and let's see, Laura, you were born in Traverse City, and there we go. 2 people were in Traverse City, and you guys can compare stories about what it used to be like 50 years ago, or people that have lived here for 50 years can say, I can remember when Airport Road was a dirt road, right? So you can go back a little ways. But then you begin to talk to people that are from different places, and it seems interesting. Now think of here that he tells the Tribune, I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no obscure city. What do you think? What do your versions read when in verse 39? If you have this is the English Standard Version. No insignificant city. What is it? No mean city. Now, that doesn't mean that they're cruel. It's not an average city. It's not poor. Okay, it's a significant city. And doing some reading in history, and this is going to come up actually in not too distant from this conversation that he's having with the Tribune, because he tells them he's from Cilicia. Now, the Tribune and other people would not have realized this. And not every place in the Roman Empire automatically made you a United States citizen, a Roman citizen, okay? Just like your daughter that was born in Germany, she might have had some paperwork to do. Yeah, a naturalized citizen. So if you were born in certain areas of the Roman Empire, you were not automatically a Roman citizen. And someone tell me what the rights were of a Roman citizen. A trial. And how about being in prison without charges against you? Okay. Yes. Yes, and it was very detailed. And the crux of it was that you can't just do anything you want to me, even though you're a big mucky muck in the military or whatever it is, because I'm a Roman citizen. Now, what do we call that in the United States? I'm going to be arrested, and what do you have to tell me? The due process, which is called, what do they have to read to you? I don't know who this Miranda is, but everybody gets arrested gets to meet this Miranda lady. Yeah. They have to read. So we have certain rights and privileges. And so it was with the Roman citizen. And when Paul here later says, by the way, I'm a Roman citizen. And that's when people say, whoa. Yeah, we just put our hands on a Roman citizen. And that is worthy of death if Paul wanted to press it. But Paul wasn't necessarily wanting to press it so that he could, oh, you put your hands on me? You're about to find out something. No, that wasn't Paul's way of doing things. But, yeah, he wanted the hands off it because he had something he wanted to say. But he was from, yes? Yes, yeah. Yeah, and for people that traveled through the Roman Empire, they might have had some sort of parchment with a stamp on it, but you didn't necessarily need that. All you had to say is you were a Roman citizen. And if you should punish someone or lay your hands on them, it was said that the weight of the Roman Empire would come down upon you. And Tarsus in Cilicia was one of those cities, and it was well known. We may not know much about it in our day and age, but in that day and age, many great philosophers came from that area. And if you read the devotionals, it would tell about some of the people that came from there. Antony and Cleopatra met together in Tarsus. They must have been making the movie, I'm sure. But one of the philosophers from that area actually tutored one of the Roman emperors in that. So it was very well known, but they had achieved that status as an exempt city that was, how did he put that? Of no obscure city, because they had supported Rome during some of their civil wars. And as a reward for that, they were given a status. Now, some cities in the United States are given a status. Sometimes when you drive into the city limits, you guys read the signs when you come into the city limits of some cities? It won the presidential award for this and this city is known as that. Okay, you probably pull alongside, stop along the road, and have your picture taken with that sign, right? It doesn't seem to mean that much to us sometimes. Now, if your kids won the softball championship of the state one year, and it says here's the Class C state girls softball championship, you might stop and have your sign there with your grandkids and say, that was my kid. Being Tarsus was even, as great as it is to have your kids on a championship team in a high school, this was even greater, because it afforded you all the rights and privileges of the Roman Empire. And so if you lived just the next town over from Tarsus, you didn't have those rights and abilities. But because you were born there. And Paul will make this statement later in the book of Acts. The guy says, you're a Roman citizen? I paid a lot of money to become a Roman citizen. Paul says, I was born one. So he says that I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia. And to the tribune, that probably didn't register, because he's up in the UP up around to the bend to the left. He's a ways away. He's in a different place. But when another man says, hey, you know what? He's a Roman citizen. So being from Tarsus in Cilicia, Paul, it meant something to him. And it's not very many times, but it's enough in the New Testament that we ought to take note of the fact that Saul, was from Tarsus. And there's some things that he's going to relate to as he tells his story. And how many different places can you recall in the New Testament and in the letters that Paul writes in the book of Acts does Paul tell about his heritage? And why does he tell that heritage? Why does he? It meant something to the Jewish people. And so when you tell your autobiography, as Bob Dylan says, my back pages. Have you heard that It's a song he wrote many years ago. It's my back page. It's my history. He tells his history. He tells about where he was from. In another place, he's going to say that I, before I was born, was set apart by God. How many people remember that you were set apart before you were born? How many people can you name in the Bible that were set apart before they were born to serve God? Paul believes he was one of those people. And because he's inspired by the Holy Spirit, we know that it's true. I was set apart before I was born. Now, we don't have that type of access to dreams and visions. When I dream, do you know what I dream about? I dream that I'm roofing a house and I can't finish it. I dreamed about roofing a house last night. That's my dreams. Do you have dreams? Do you work in your dreams? All the times. Oh, boy. And you think, I'm never going to finish this. Yeah. And, you have those dreams. But Paul says, before I was born, I was set apart by God. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Anybody here from Toledo? Tim wants to meet you. You can talk afterwards. So, the first thing that we know about Paul is that he was raised in Tarsus. But that's not where the story ends, in that Paul continues on. And our next passage that I'm going to read you Galatians 1:15. But when he who had set me apart before I was born and who called me by his grace, set me apart before I was born. And in the devotional, I asked a question, who knows that we aren't set apart before we were born? Who knows the cogs in the wheel that God uses by his providence to put us in the right place? And I know that gets way out there and we get this, woo, but we don't know. We don't know who God puts in our paths, who puts in our lives to make us who and what we are. How many of you are born in a town with a population of less than 5,000? Beulah's less than 5,000? Are you kidding me? I thought it was like 1 million, like 1.5 million. Population's less than 5,000. Over 1 million. Anybody raised in big cities? No? But everybody here is from somewhere. Yeah, that was a big town. Big town. How's that for a profound statement? Everybody here is from somewhere. Wherever you go, that's where you are. Write that down. Everybody here is from somewhere. And how many of us use that place that we were born as sort of a springboard for, I was raised in a small town in central Michigan. And I know you really want to hear a lot about Gladwin. But Gladwin had a lot to do with who I was. And when Paul uses this statement about Tarsus and Cilicia, it doesn't mean that much to us. But it did in Acts chapter 17. Because in Acts chapter 17, where does Paul go? Paul goes to the center of philosophy of the world. He goes to Athens. And he goes toe-to-toe with the Epicurean and the Stoic philosophers. And one of those great Stoic philosophy schools was located in none other than little old Tarsus. So when Paul is speaking to these philosophers, he knows what he's talking about because he had lived in that town. Yeah, but he doesn't say, hey, I want to talk to you Stoic philosophers because I'm from Tarsus. He doesn't mention anything about that, but he would have had that background in his life. Now, the next passage we're going to look at is Philippians chapter 3. And Paul, and I mentioned before, in several places in Paul's writings and in the book of Acts, Paul has to sort of make an apologetics. And when I say an apology, he's not saying I'm sorry for where I'm from, but he's having to make an argument, and that's what apologia means in Greek. It means you're making a defense. When someone stands up in court in the ancient times of Rome, you made an apologetic. You made an apology. You made a defense of this. And the book of Philippians chapter 3, let's begin in verse 1. Finally, my brothers, that's the word you often want to hear when I'm preaching. Finally, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord. To write the same thing to you is no trouble to me and is safe for you. Look out for the dogs, look out for the evildoers, look out for those who mutilate the flesh, for we are the circumcision. Now he's going to begin to form an argument about, in dealing with those, what we would call the Judaizers, ones that said, you must become part of the law, you must adhere to what Moses teaches. For we are the circumcision, verse 3, who worship by the Spirit of God, and glory in Christ Jesus, and put no confidence in the flesh. Though, and here it is, though I myself have reason for confidence in the flesh also. If anyone thinks he has reason for confidence in the flesh, I have more. And here is my pedigree, or what I call street cred. How many of you have used that term street cred in the last week? Does anybody know what street cred is? Yeah. Word. Street cred. It's your credit. Yes, here's a teacher. He could tell us all about that. You probably use it all in school, don't you? Oh, see, I knew it. I knew the moment I discovered that term that I'd already be way behind. I'm flexing, yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's the stuff we're made of. Yeah, the stuff we like to brag about. This is who I am. It's in, if you look at someone who is qualified in certain areas, you want to see some letters behind their name. PhD, a bachelor in something, blah, 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 blah. He says, though I myself have confidence in the flesh also. If anyone thinks he has reason for confidence in the flesh, I have more. So whatever, what's the musical? Anything you can do, I can do better? Yeah. He's not, he tells us he's not bragging, but he's letting them know, I'm not going to take a back seat to anybody on this. I know what I'm talking about. Circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel. Why would that be important? Yes. You think you're Jewish? I was circumcised on the 8th day. I was there. I don't remember it, but I was there. Yes, it is a big deal. It is your street cred. He's flexing. Of the tribe of Benjamin. He knows his heritage. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. Not everybody could prove what tribe they were from. A Hebrew of Hebrews. I've used the example of that line that starts way back in the Old Testament. And the first time that the word Hebrew is used is well in the early part of the book of Genesis. And there's a couple of different thoughts as to where it came from. If you look at the genealogy, there's a man named Eber. Some people think, oh, that's where Hebrew comes from, is that lineage. Other people say, no, it means separate. Whatever you believe is okay. But if you say you're a Hebrew, then the next big one, when you come to that part in the road, is you're in Israel. Okay? But not all Israel was saved, because the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And the southern kingdom became what we know of as Jews, which is sort of an abbreviation of Judah. That's why they call them that. So Hebrews, Israel, Jews. So he's using all of these terms for it. Let's see. Of the people of Israel, tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as to the law, a Pharisee. Now we're talking about my education, or as I call it, my edumacation. He's educated. He's not just anybody as a Jew. He is a Pharisee. And Pharisee goes back about 3 centuries before Jesus. And they were people that, like all good movements, started out with the greatest of intents. Is they were in that time when the Greeks were in charge. They had taken over that area, and then the Romans came in, but they really wanted to keep the Jewish religion pure. So they started this sect. They didn't intend, I'm sure, to end up as this, but they wanted to be pure. They wanted to be separate. I think the Greek word in its loosest forms means to separate in this. They wanted to separate. And he says, as to the law, a Pharisee. And when he said, as to the law, a Pharisee, they would have known exactly what that means. That means if it says I have to wash this many times and in this manner. Anybody watch doctors wash in the, not the delivery room, the operating room, the place before they get in the operating room. Back when I was a surgeon, Janine thinks that's funny, that's why I use it a lot. What? You don't think that's funny? And so there's a certain way that you wash as a surgeon. That makes sense. You want stuff to... And so as a Jew, you would have... And it's funny to read the description of it, in that you hold your hands this way. If you let them go down like this, well, everything that's impure would run down. So they would wash this way, and then there was just a ritual that they went through. Yeah. And as far as how far I'm going to travel on the Sabbath, these things that I'm going to do, when I prayed, I was just like the Pharisee. Everything that he did spoke of, I am somebody. I was a Pharisee. As to zeal, a persecutor of the church. I was zealous. We might tolerate certain movements, even in our society today, and it's always been that we may say, well, those whatever wing of believers in something, you might just say, oh, whatever. But people who are really zealous go after them and make sure that they don't have their platform to speak. They are just going to be vocal and active. As to zeal, a persecutor of the... That's how zealous I was. I was a persecutor of the group that I am now a member of. As to righteousness under the law, blameless. Every part of the law I adhered to. I was blameless in all of this. Yeah. Yep. And that would be such a great line in a song if someone were to write something like, my richest gain I count but loss. Wouldn't that make a great line in a song? Oh, wait, it already is. My richest gain I count but loss. Yes, pour contempt on all my pride. But whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ. This isn't the only time that Paul gives these qualifications that he has. But in a sense, he almost has to, because he is being bombarded from all sides, it seems. As he writes to the Galatian, and Galatia was a part of northern and northeast Turkey, a large area of it. The Galatians were being overrun by the Judaizers. Says, no, this whole circumcision, this keeping the law of Moses, you got to keep this. And so Paul writes, that's why he writes the letter to the Galatians. And he begins to talk in a sense of that too. He is catching it from all sides and saying, who is this Paul guy? Like, who is, when people attack you personally, that's when you know you have won. Do you ever find that out? And when you're in an argument, you might not be able to relate to this because probably nobody here has ever argued with someone, right? What? Trust me, I've made a fool of myself more times than I care to remember. But you're arguing with someone, and there's the person, and they're making a pretty good argument. It says, well, you're an idiot. When I say that, that's what I know I've lost. When you start name calling. That's what I know when you get into watching political debates. Once they attack their personality, that's when I know they've got nothing else. They have nothing on their platform. That's just my opinion. But he says, but whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ. Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish in order that I may gain Christ. So we learn a little bit about Paul. We know that he is from Saul of Tarsus, which would have given him great credibility when he came to argue with the philosophers. But notice Paul only really argues philosophy one time that we have recorded in the book of Acts, and that's in Athens. And it's not long after that that Paul says that what does he preach? Jesus Christ and him crucified. Paul understands that he was not called to argue with philosophers. He was called to preach the gospel in all of this. And the next one is Acts chapter 22, verse 3. That'll be the last one when we close out, because somebody's going to ring that bell. In Acts chapter 22, beginning in verse 1, Paul, brothers and fathers, hear the defense. And that word for defense, guess what it is? Apologia. Hear the defense that I now make before you. And when they heard that he was addressing them in the Hebrew language, this is the continuation of what we had just read earlier. When they heard him in the Hebrew language, remember, they live in a Greek world. And so many of the people, most of them, might have spoken both Greek and Hebrew. But Paul is in the temple, and he addresses them in the Hebrew language. So they're going to listen. They became even more quiet, and he said, I am a Jew born in Tarsus in Cilicia and brought up in this city, educated at the feet of Gamaliel, according to the strict manner of the law of our fathers, being zealous for God, as all of you are this day. He drops one more little breadcrumb to him when he says, I was educated at the feet of Gamaliel. Now, if I said, I was educated at the feet of Mrs. Woods, Mrs. Ruby Woods. You know Mrs. Woods, my 5th grade teacher in Gladwin. How many of you have met Mrs. Woods? So there's no credibility there, is there? I played baseball under Sparky Anderson. How many of you would have a little bit of respect for that? Well, Sparky had some detractors. I knew that. But I would have, because you've heard of Sparky Anderson. And whatever you might have liked or disliked about him, he did win the championship in both leagues, American and national. And if I were to say, well, I served under, let's see, who could I use as a good example of science, if we were here talking about science? I studied with Stephen Hawking or Thomas Edison. You may not agree with some of the things, but you say, oh, I've heard of him. He's world famous. When Paul says, I was educated at the feet of Gamaliel, there were two great rabbis in the first century, end of the before Christ and the beginning of, and Gamaliel was obviously alive in Christ's lifetime. There was Hillel and Gamaliel. And their writings are still referred to by Jews today. Rabbis still read their opinions on it. And one was a little bit more progressive, one of them was a little bit more conservative, as we might call it. They were sort of opposite sides, but they would have respected each other. So when Paul says, I was educated at the feet of Gamaliel, he's not puffing himself up, but who's Paul talking to here? Brothers and fathers, hear the defense. He's speaking to Jewish people. Number one, he speaks to them in Hebrew. And number two, he says, I was educated at the feet of Gamaliel. That meant something. He's from this may have been obscure to people living in Palestine, but to people in the Roman Empire, he lived in a free city called Tarsus. And everything that he could check off in the box as far as being important to Jewish people, Hebrew of Hebrews, I'm from the tribe. I can even name my tribe. He probably knows his lineage all the way back to King Saul. I'm a Jew. I'm a Pharisee. I studied under Gamaliel. That gets people's attention. We learned a lot about Paul, even though we've only looked at just a few verses. Now, the only other thing we know about Gamaliel we find in the book of Acts, to where they're ready to put a whooping on him. Go ahead. He was probably a little bit more liberal. If I'm the opposite on that, I had a 50-50 chance. But it seems to me that he was one of his thoughts was that you could divorce for any reason. If she burned your breakfast, you could divorce her. And Hillel, I think, was just the opposite. He wanted to keep them. But the only other time we read about Gamaliel is Gamaliel says, you know what? I got a couple examples here of people who thought there was something, but they came to nothing. So I say to you, keep your hands off of him, because if he's from God, or if he's of man, it won't amount to anything. But if he's from God, you're going to find yourself fighting against God. And that's the only other thing we know about Gamaliel, those words that are kept forever. Okay. She's rung the bells and rung me right out of my job.